Welcome to the adventures of self. Conversations with ordinary and extraordinary people as they explore what it means to be self-expressed. Come on in. Join the adventure.
So, welcome, Georgie Holbrook, to the Adventures of Self.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be with you.
Oh, thank you, Georgie. Well, I'm honored to have you here and to be with you here today, and that we can share this experience with our listeners.
Where we can take our wisdom, right, and share with our audience.
Yes. Collective individual wisdom, and we may even create some wisdom along the way.
Awesome.
Cool. So just before we kind of get into the wisdom and whatever we're going to create here, I just want to take just a minute or so to introduce you, because I think you've got quite an amazing, I would say unique story, but I mean, it's unique in a particular way, but it's also, it's funny, we were talking like, it's universal in another way. Yeah, because there's points where we meet sort of our corporate past, and then there's points where we meet now in our sort of, in our wisdom or spiritual journey. So just take a minute, if you don't mind, to just tell us about how you got to where you are here today.
So you want my story right now?
A little bit, yeah. Just like a little bit of the intro. You actually want to invite people in, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
I would like to start out with doing an intention.
Yeah.
And invite our audience today to tap in and make your own intention of something that Taylor and I say that could be life-changing for you from this moment on. And that if it's something that we're not saying, that inside of your heart that you get this idea that would be life-changing. And I also invite you to take notes, because along the way there's going to be things that we say that also will be like a direction and a path that you can take. So my background, just briefly, I'm an emotional wellness coach, and what I do is mentor people in how our body is our instrument, and it also has a language that we have not been taught. And so when we have health issues, for example, our emotions will manifest in health conditions as a language, not to be medicated as much as to be understood, and many times reverse. So the principles are natural, and they're also principles that can be worked in the workplace, in corporate life, in business, in personal life. But natural principles just work because they're inherent in us to work, which is such a beautiful program. And most of my life, I didn't know that.
I think that the vast majority of us have no introduction to the concept of natural energies, natural ways of being, and it's we kind of think that it's like, oh, there's organic food and there's non-organic food, and we think that that's kind of quote unquote natural or something, and I'm not to say it's not, but it's like the tiniest little piece of a puzzle. And yeah, and thank you also for setting, it's great, like, to have the connection with energy, to know that kind of pushing you into the introduction was the wrong way, and for you to kind of have that set that intention from the beginning. It's a really useful tool. I hope for listeners that's the intention, but also I think for myself and for you and for anybody, that at any moment when we're going into whether that's a meeting at work, a date with our loved one, a vacation, a big presentation for your job, producing a work of art, whatever it is, playing with your child, that you can actually set an intention. And it's really remarkable that when you set an intention, and you don't have to do much to really hold on to that intention. You might have to remind yourself every now and then as you start to veer off course. But if you've set an intention to have an amazing experience, to learn a lot, to connect to your heart, to express, beautiful emotion, to, connect with a business partner, create a magical, business endeavor, whatever it is, that intention, that tiny little seed, that tiny little pebble that you start with, or, seed, I guess is probably the best analogy, can grow so effortlessly and easily just by setting that intention from the beginning. And it goes to, I think it's a good way to kind of go into more the understanding of natural energies.
We could say the universe says to us today, what do you want? And most of us, for most of my life, I came with asking for little because I thought that I deserved little. And the universe says, you can have it all, right? You can create, and I'm here for you. So the intention just opens up that to say, I'm one with the one, the bigger one, the one that does have answers.
And, the one that is actually beyond answers. I mean, we use words that we use words to describe something that's beyond words, which is, it's sort of a limitation of our human condition, that we learn to speak and communicate like we are now through words, but those connections with, you can read poetry, you can see paintings, or listen to music that expresses nature or tries to approximate it as close as possible. But when you go to any real natural space, whether that's the ocean or a mountain or a sunset, or it is truly beyond words, right? We're just using words to try to say, oh, that was beautiful, but it doesn't even begin to capture the infinite aspect, the energy that's inherent within that space.
But what if we today could see that the universe operates in harmony and brings out the sun and the moon and the planets and the stars, and that intelligence lives inside of us and also requires that we live in harmony inside of ourselves. And we have not been taught that. So I have the illustration that if we were sitting on a riverbank and we watch the river, it flows in one direction. But for me, I was taught to go upstream, and that life was hard and the suffering was just normal. And I was conditioned to do work that I didn't enjoy. And so life became hard. And we can continue in that, but our body will break down. But what's the good news is that we really are sacred, however we want to define that. But we are, some people feel that our soul is sacred, but our body and mind are not, and that we can discount ourselves and devalue ourselves and be in relationships that we don't enjoy or that don't enhance our life. The important thing is to get in harmony with the bigger picture. And when I do, prosperity flows because I fall in love with myself and I start living my passion rather than what I've been taught that I just have to work, sleep, and eat. Very important to step back and say, maybe I've had the wrong identity most of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're sort of the Western world that you and I grew up in. It's produced all sorts of wonderful, amazing things, but it does have this concept of real separation, that we are a particular thing, and nature, for instance, is another thing entirely. And yes, the idea of a soul, for instance, is it's kind of almost like relegated to the side. It's like, oh, well, that's what you do at church, or at the mosque, or
Right.
synagogue, like on a particular day, but it's not something that's an inherent aspect. And there's kind of the common expressions people say. Our common understanding is I'm this body, and I have a soul. And the other way of saying it is, no, you're a soul, and you just happen to occupy a body. And even that shift in perception, that you actually are already connected to everything. You already are one with nature. Like how could you not be?
Right.
And so then you just happen to occupy one particular body, like a squirrel does, like a tree does, like Georgie does, like
a butterfly, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we're born sacred, and we come into this world with a purpose and passion, just like our fingerprints, that nobody else can fulfill. And I don't want to die with my art still left in me, whatever that mission was that I came in for. And the gifts are, I start identifying with my passion. And then I find that I become authentic. I'm not just work, sleep, and eat. I'm not in this routine. I break loose from that, and I start listening to my body. So I'm authentic. I'm congruent. I make my yes a yes, my no a no. I fall in love with myself. I find that peace within at whatever price is really important for me, and that living in harmony with my environment and really the people around me, and appreciating them, and not being caught up in a self-talk that's opposite. So sometimes we can pretend, right, that we're happy and we got the right clothes on, but our self-talk can be very, very damaging. But once I understand who I really am at a deeper level, I start healing my hidden hurts and my traumas and my resentments and the way I'm devaluating myself, but also the way that I've allowed other people to devalue me or put demands on me that were not natural.
Yeah. The thing that stood out at me, you were talking about being authentic, and it takes me, I sort of say sometimes on the show, I like words, I like etymology. I mean, even though it's a limitation, it's interesting because it is the way we express ourselves, and obviously this is a talking format. And we talk about people being authentic, and what's really nice about that, like the root, the auth part, it's it's the same as being an author. So you're actually writing. When you're authentic, you are writing your story as you choose, and it really goes. Auth is about self, and this is the adventures of self, and it's that you talked about congruence, about balance, about integration, about being in harmony. But it's as much about being in harmony with yourself, because in my experience, and I'd like to hear a little bit about kind of like what the journey you've been on. when things aren't going well, it's convenient, it's easy to look for outside reasons. Oh, my mother did this, my father didn't do this, the world, the universe is doing XYZ, whatever. But really, I look back and I realize, oh, I did that. I actually created my unhappiness. I created my anger. I created my dissatisfaction from often from, like you were talking about, what I would tell myself, right? I have a, whatever you might call it, a program or a tendency to, there's a part of me that wants to, I don't know, doesn't want to succeed or has learned to go out and compete or to just not be authentic, to not be in line with myself. And I love how you said about, like, you've got art in you, whatever that is. That may be paintings, that may be books, that may be a family, that may be a new business. Art, we speak of art quite broadly, and that's in you. We all are here to have that expression. So beautiful.
So we're trained generational, our beliefs and experiences. So that's been our role model. Doesn't mean that it was right. And I believe we're chosen now to break out of that. And that's where all possibilities are.
One of the first guests we had on the show is a very good friend of mine who is a medical doctor here in the UK, went to Cambridge and has worked, 35 years or so in medicine. And she talks about how there, science is actually showing, and has for a while actually, but it's becoming more widely accepted, that generational aspect. That, for instance, if your mother or grandfather or whomever in your family went through a particularly challenging, like extremely challenging time, we've kind of, particularly in the West, except for the last year, which is just a blip, haven't really gone through, we haven't had wars, we haven't had famines, but certainly 70, 80, 100 years ago, more, that was pretty common every now and then, right? There was some really horrible war, there was a famine, there was a drought that, seriously impacted people's lives for, 5-10 years. It, was and if somebody goes through that, it actually affects the cell level, right? I mean, you kind of, once you hear it, you think, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. How could it not, right? If you've gone through, say, 5 years of war, civil war, or tanks rolling through your town, and then there's no food around, like, obviously that's going to impact you on a physical level, an emotional level. And it does, we're just a bunch of cells collected together. So it collects that trauma, that strain, that stress. And there's all sorts of other things, from, that's just kind of the external factors, but there's familial and cultural things that are impacting us all as well. And so as, a couple are creating children and procreating, they are passing that cellular information onto their children and down onwards. The Native Americans speak about, you look back 7 generations and you look forward 7 generations, and that maybe just be arbitrary in terms of where you lie. Like, you've inherited 7 generations and you are called to be responsible for 7 generations going forward. So, the opportunity to really see that and to be aware of what you're made of, what has come to create you, is a landscape of possibility, and then you get to choose what to do with that.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
It is.
I really believe that our traumas are held accumulate in our bodies. So we keep stuffing the traumas, the hurts, whatever, and trying to ride over the top of them. And I believe in talk therapy, but we could talk about it from now until forever. But with my clients, I just teach them that it's really important to identify, not relive the past, right? But really acknowledge what we've been through. And I put them through a whole program of releasing that so we can have freedom from it because it's accumulated, like you just said, in the cell memory.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear a little bit about how that works and what the experience is, because we don't tend to think about wanting to release, because we actually think that if we release trauma, it's going to be worse because we're going to relive it, and it's and there's a sort of a concept, I think, that because we've gone through something, and sometimes we're not even excuse me, aware of, because some things are very, very early on in childhood, pre-memory, pre-conscious memory, and people don't really want to. I can think of particular people like in my family who I've known, who they're aware of something that's happened from their childhood, but they just say, no, I'm just not going to go there. And I can, it's that person's journey, so it's not for me to determine, but I can see pain and real challenge for them in that. And so, like, when you're working with somebody, what's the I don't know, how do you help unlock that? Because I think a lot of people, when they think about trauma, when they think about pain, they say, why would I go back there? Why would I deal with that at all? It's over, it's done. I'm just going to look forward, and okay, maybe I need to take antacid heartache medicine, or I have a couple of drinks a few times a week, or I have something. We often kind of, if we don't deal with the trauma, it's going to show up another way, right? That's kind of another sort of basic natural law, right? if it's going to release itself in some way, and we're either going to do that consciously, and as you said in the beginning, with intention, or it's going to be unconscious, and we are not in any way really in control of how that's coming out. Yes, I'm curious.
For years, I thought my past was behind me. I was one of those people, like your relatives. My past was behind me. I'm not going to deal with it. But see, my body was telling my story. So our body is very honest. And people come to me saying, I don't want to deal with my past. I don't want to deal with the emotions. But the truth is, we don't have to relive the past, but just imagine the sacred being violated from these stories, from the trauma, violated. And it wants to be acknowledged, not relived. But how are you breathing? How are you swallowing? How are you sleeping? Just go on to acknowledge that the sacred has been violated, and now start self-nurturing, even in a lavish way, for all the ways that we've been hurt. So for me, to recover from our stories is to step into, I need to fall in love with myself. So if I have 10 clients and I tell all of them to go in front of a mirror and say or sing how I love you, 8 of them will choke on it and can't do it. Even the best of the best, sometimes when I teach them about the importance even of your little toe, right? When's the last time you appreciated your little toe or your foot? And people just ignore their bodies. So I have this whole program of coming back to our own consciousness, of valuing ourselves. And some people will say, I hate my body. I'm not going to look at my body. I'm not going to massage my body. And I go, that's where we're going to start. That's where we're going to start. And the self-talk has to be turned around. All these ways that we put ourselves down and the sacred has to be addressed in order to come back and live in harmony with what I call the sacred. The inherent nature within us is going to win. And so when I share my story, you'll actually hear how I turned that around out of my own innocence of devaluating myself that was handed down generations, that work was the only thing I was here for.
Yeah. So, well, you kind of gave an introduction, so maybe we kind of transition into, because I know you've got really, quite an amazing personal story around body and healing and wellness,
Right.
and the emotions.
You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm really honored to tell my story, and I've written 4 self-help books. My healing story has been in 23 national magazines, and I've taught across, I'm in the United States here, across the country in 16 different states. So I didn't always have this information. So at age 25, we'll start there. I was a vice president for a company that I helped grow nationally, and I had everything money could buy. So I drove a company car, and because I helped them grow nationally, often I would go to the airport and they would have a private plane take me to locations so that I didn't have to drive. So on the outside, it looked really like I really had arrived, right? Had fancy clothes. So I was in 3 board of directors, mainly for my intuition and my wisdom of solving almost anything. And one of those companies was a 100-year-old company that invited me to be on their executive board for solving issues of whatever. They could just toss out something and somehow I would figure it out. And fast forward, and by age 30, I was hired by a Fortune 500 company, and then the demands got greater. So now I'm signing an agreement that I'm available 7 days a week. Many days I work 12, 14 hours. We had 40,000 employees, and life from the outside looked good, but I didn't have a life. So I was committed. And so I have this saying that, what do you worship? And I ended up worshiping work, right? But from here, I've had a lot of head knowledge, and so I was hired for the amazing mind that I had, but I really felt used on some level. I was very, very empty, and what I call dry bones, just dry inside, right? Fast forward again, 36 years old, I hardly ever in my corporate world experience ever got sick. And if I got sick, I worked over the top because they needed me, right? You have this mentality and arrogance, that they're more important than I am, even my health. So at age 36, I get allergies and I sneezed just a lot. And so I go to my allergy doctor, and they start giving me allergy shots 3 times a week for 5 months. And if we stopped right there and looked at the emotional component, allergies are very common, but everything has an emotional component that's happening in the body. So for me, it wasn't about being allergic to animals or pollen or trees or flowers. It wasn't any of that. The emotional component was I was allergic to one person that gave me an assignment that was far bigger than what I was capable of. And so my whole body reacted in this way that could have been solved right there if I would have known how to say no. I always knew how to say yes. All right, so I take allergy shots, and after 5 months, my face starts getting red. And then it broke out in acne. Now I'm 36 years old, right? And eventually it started breaking out in boils. And so I went to my first skin cancer doctor, not thinking I had cancer, but I wanted a quick fix in the corporate world. Makeup wasn't covering it up. And it was like, there's something going on, but I need to just get rid of this. And so what they offered was medication. And I knew in my heart that medication was not what I was lacking, but I had no idea what I was lacking. Now just imagine that I can know all this stuff about business and know zero about my body. In an emergency, that is too late to start studying natural remedies and how this body operates. So we always want to get into practicing prevention and really understanding what my body needs. And I sure didn't know the emotional language behind what was going on with my face. So I have the saying that you can't solve a problem, both business or in personal life, at the level of the effect. So the effect was on my face, but the cause was internal, both emotional. In my world, in what I teach, it's about 80% emotional rather than physical. So here I am. Fast forward again, in 6 years, I went to many, many specialists, both medical and holistic, asking the same question, have you seen anybody heal from anything? Because I believe our body is not as complicated as what we have been taught. And from the time we were little and we had a health issue, our caregivers always took us to a doctor. So we have this mentality that the doctor has the answer. And that leaves us very innocent, doesn't it? Mm. So at age 36, I was innocent. Also went to the doctor, but I didn't like the answer. So by 42 years old, I had been to many doctors and progressively getting worse on diet and everything that I could study. So I took it on just like a corporate problem. But you notice in the corporate world, incurable was never used. I wouldn't have had a job if I came up to my employers and said, this is incurable. But in the health field, it's tossed around. This is just incurable. You're going to have it for life. And it was like, what? Right? If I scratch my arm, if any of us scratch our arm today, it heals. So that immune system, that sacred side of us, knows how to heal us and turn our lives around. So by age 42, now I'm lancing boils daily. My skin was called elephant skin, you can imagine. So it was rough. There was no answer that I was finding. And it was a comforting thought to think of suicide. At 42, if I have to live the next 40 years this way, I'm just not going to make it. But thank goodness there was also the challenge inside of me. But what if I can find the answer? What if I, like a dog with a bone, I'm just on this trail of saying there has to be an answer. This cannot be as complicated. And I'm going to share with the world if I ever find the results, not knowing that I would find the results. And I ended up in California listening to 5 medical doctors talking about how to heal cancer, coronary, and stroke. I knew I didn't have any of them, but I also figured that the body had some similarities on healing. And in those 5 doctors, there was one that came to the United States, became a medical doctor where they taught him how to medicate and also how to cut out different issues. But he wanted to study the immune system. So when I heard him talk, he was the first person in 6 years that actually had understanding of the immune system. And so I was fortunate enough to have 1 hour with this man. And he went through my files and he said, remember that first allergy shot you took? Most people get arthritis and all kinds of other crippling things from taking that allergy shot. And I was like, wow. So he said, I don't know if you'll ever heal, but stop going to doctors showing you pictures of deformed faces, right? Because our imagination starts picturing what we're seeing. He says, stop going to doctors and find peace within. I don't know if you'll ever heal. but you have to find peace within, because as he took my pulse from my wrist, he could tell how all 12 organ systems were out of harmony, and I had an internal quiver. My clothes weren't shaking, but 24 hours a day, I had this nervous tension from being so traumatized. He said, you can't heal with that. So that's a principle that people can take notes on today. If you have that internalized quiver, you're not going to heal. You've actually moved out of harmony with nature. So he says, find peace within. Well, Taylor, I hadn't had peace within for as long as I knew, and I sure didn't have joy in my life. So I ended up going into more of a corporate setting. There was a workshop that offered how to be empowered and let go of fear. And I was pretty skinny at the time. I had lost so much weight from being traumatized that you could count my ribs. And I didn't know at what point I would have a nervous breakdown and just lose my mind. And if I was going to go in front of 80 people looking at me, I didn't know if I could do it. But anyway, I went, and I was almost speechless because I was so traumatized that I just observed that those 80 people, as they told their stories and I watched them heal, I started healing through them. It was like, wow, nobody's addressed the emotional component over all these years. Nobody asked me, what does it feel to Lance Boyles? Do you need a hug? When was the last time you cried? Do you need a friend? There was nobody safe enough or knowledgeable enough to really help me at that level. But here's this workshop. So I stayed with this group for 9 months. And over those 9 months, my face healed, capillaries healed. You can see my face is beautiful. And my eyesight came back. So I healed within a year, and I dedicated myself to sharing my story, that emotions really play a big part in our healing journey in bringing us back to our sacred self. So through that, it wasn't as easy as I thought. When I healed physically, the trauma was accumulated in my body, and it took me another 10 years to really overcome that. And how it looked the first year I was just so ready to go out and share my story, but that wasn't the way it worked. My brain and my mouth couldn't function together. I couldn't spontaneously talk like I'm doing now. I would write the notes down for you and pray that you never asked me a question, because I couldn't fire my brain and my mouth together. Then I would go home and I would just go into hysterics, because what has happened to me? Here's this corporate person, that had it all, and now I don't have anything. And so it took a while for me to heal layers and layers and layers. And that's the good news now, because after 20 some years of helping not only myself heal, but I've helped hundreds of people heal using the same natural principles of bringing them back. Like today, if we had a crying baby, right, we'd take them in our arms and we would just cradle them. And there'd be a moment when they would feel safe and they would feel the warmth of our body and go, ah, and stop crying, right? So our body also, we've been through a lot, and internally we're crying too. We're crying for our own self-love. We're crying to be treated like royalty, and we're not.
Yeah. Thank you, Georgie. It's a really beautiful story, and I know there's so much more to it. And I think the thing that stands out is just kind of how you kind of ended with the story is not only the importance, but the opportunity to love yourself. And I would say even more than that. I'm thinking even for myself now. It's really helpful and beautiful to hear your story. The absolute necessity that you cannot really be of service out in the world unless you have, and maybe I should just say I cannot be of service in the world really unless I have acknowledged, accept, integrated myself, and that starts with love. Love's a very complicated word. I mean, it's pretty simple in some way, but it's very complicated because we're definitely not taught to love ourselves. You might say, oh, you should be proud of yourself for making this accomplishment. But love, like when we think about, you say like love of a small baby, right? That unconditional love that no matter what happens, you still love yourself or whatever the object is. But here it's like your subject and object is the same, right? So there's no separation.
Right.
And it is it's a practice. And when I sit down and allow myself to, because I can think, oh, I didn't do this well, or I didn't, whatever, something didn't work out well. And that self-talk, the criticism, the beating myself up, the whatever's going to come out, can be very, very loud. And I've learned that, I've learned that voice is useful, but only as a learning tool, as a signal. It may actually signal me to where I need to go, or what I need to appreciate or to learn. But if I'm subservient to that inner voice, that inner critic, I've really neglected so much of what is actually possible for me to in terms of just self appreciation.
Mm-hmm. So that negative self-talk, I believe, can actually change the chemistry in our body to being toxic. Our toxic thoughts then get internalized. So just a piece of my story, what I found was that trial and error remedies left me getting worse. I felt helpless, hopeless, and I ended up distrusting my own body. And what I find is that is a journey of pain. And so what I've done is I've created an evaluation. I call it an evaluation tool, where I look at 16 areas of one's life, because the saying, we can't see the trees for the forest. And when we're caught up in a lifestyle, a career, whatever, we can't see where we need to change. How am I ever going to get out of that work, sleep, eat like a circus animal? This is all I do, right? So the 16 areas, we step back, and in an hour and a half, people actually get their own answers of where they're out of balance or in balance, right? But part of that is also something interesting, because I had so many side effects. So there's an evaluation that part of it is looking at 43 areas of one's life, really getting down to the emotional and physical symptoms that we take for granted, ignore, deny, from hair loss to feeling exhaustion, empty. It could be cold hands, cold feet, but I go down this whole list because I had most, if not all of them, and have healed them. But if we take individually, like a pain in the knee, or roller coaster mood swings, or hidden hurts, or I still have losses that I have not forgiven, whatever that is, right? We take a look at it and see how we're carrying it in our body, and what it takes to understand what's behind that language, so we can heal it. So it's not just taking the evaluation, but then going further into, okay, here's where I'm at in life, but here's where I want to be. And let's start there, or I can take you by the hand. So one of the questions I ask people, if your body could talk, how would it explain how you treat yourself? Right? And if we could all, because the world right now is in chaos, but there's a good news from a higher perspective, it's all coming into alignment. Like the worst storms is the greatest rainbows. So could we find ways to make the world a better place? Can we look in somebody's eyes without words and send a blessing now that we're wearing our mask? Can we look in the mirror and truly sing, I love you? And that if we have hidden hurts from the past, I believe we need to heal them. There's a child inside of all of us, that inner child that's longing to be acknowledged for what we went through so we can come out the other side as a gift. What we heal becomes a gift to give others. So my story has become a gift for many people around the world. I've written 4 self-help books, as I said, and it's just been a beautiful journey. And one of my spiritual teachers asked me, would you go through that whole Rosacea story to help people around the world? And I didn't hesitate. I just said yes, So it's been a journey. It really has been a journey. I'm still, I'm not saying that I've arrived. Things, changes still take place in my life, but I keep reaching for a better life. What's the ultimate in health and happiness? And do I have joy in my life?
There's a couple of things that come to me. One, when you're talking about like the healing path, it takes me back to what we started with, which is having an intention. Right? There is this, a lot of what it takes me also back to the I think it was episode 2 of this podcast, health in the modern body, because we got into a lot of this, my friend Nicole and I, talking about how so much of medicine and science today tries to get down to smaller and smaller bits and pieces, and which is useful on one level, but if it ignores the whole, then it's kind of pointless, right? It's like your forest and trees analogy. It's very useful to know how, I don't know, the mechanics of a finger works, or how the liver does whatever chemical processes it does, but only if you understand it in the grander context. And that's largely what we've forgotten, or we've lost, or we've, I don't know, just abandoned.
We don't look at the whole person. We go to a doctor for the knee, roller coaster mood swings for our eyes, for our lungs. So we're all in these isolated body parts, and that was actually my story. For 6 years, that's all everybody looked at, was just my face. We didn't look at the whole person. Great point that you're bringing out.
Yeah, and the left to its kind of own devices, like the body seeks to heal itself. And I'm not saying that you just, if I'm not saying that if you don't feel well, just sit there and everything will be fine. But the body does have a self-regulating mechanism, because what you were saying, right? You can get to a point where the palpitations or whatever, where you're beyond a sort of healing frame or realm, and you need to address some basic things. But the healing, I mean, I actually was just doing some fasting, and I was talking to somebody about this. They said, "Oh, why do you fast?" One of the things that's sort of well understood about fasting is, when you take some period of time, say 24 hours, or I've done longer fasts of several days, and on the one hand, it's challenging because you're not getting the food and energy, so you do need to take time for it. But digestion takes an enormous amount of energy and effort for us. The blood required to go to the stomach and the abdomen, and if you're having three big meals a day, it takes a lot to do that. You're kind of always more or less digesting or preparing to digest. And when you go through a period of fasting, like intermittent fasting has this, but more like 24-hour or several day fasting, your body can start to do other things like repair. It will repair cells. It will deal with all sorts of things that, people say, oh, this has been a problem for 20, 30, 40 years. And when I fasted, regularly for some period of time, this went away. And I think as well, like, you were talking about breathing, diet, breath. We've talked about on this show a few times. Like, I'm very interested in breath, and the word, like when we say respire, I mean the again, getting to root, right? The root of breath, right, in Latin is spirit. So like we are literally breathing in and out spirit, and that's why you go and get deep oxygen from being in nature, outside of the city. When you do breathing exercise, you feel more alive because you're bringing spirit, you're bringing life into you.
Beautiful.
And the other thing I thought to, something you were speaking about.
Also, before we leave, I would love to sing a song. I write songs.
Please do.
So I didn't sing for 20 years from the time I was a child. And then when I started singing, I'm back really enjoying my life.
Please, would love to hear it.
Okay. So I play guitar, and I'm learning to play the harmonium because my goal is I really want to lead people in sacred chants. So I'm going to put my music up here. So this is a song I wrote exactly talking about what we're talking about today. Can you hear my guitar okay?
Yep.
Okay. So we're talking about coming back to our sacredness. So the title is The One That I Love. The one that I love lives inside of me, waiting like a lover for me to discover, hidden in plain sight. The one that I love lives inside of me. Sparkle in my eyes, connected to the stars in the sky. May I never forget my oneness with the divine. Divine lives within me. May I never forget. Waiting like a lover for me to discover, hidden in plain sight. The one that I love lives inside of me. The sacred one. Listen to those words. The sacred one lives inside of me. I will never forget I am sacred. The one that I love lives inside of me, waiting like a lover for me to discover, hidden in plain sight. The one that I love lives inside of me. Sparkle in my eyes, connected to the stars in the sky. May I never forget my oneness with the divine. May I never forget my oneness with the divine. Divine lives within me. May I never forget. Divine lives within me. May I never forget. Waiting like a lover for me to discover, hidden in plain sight. The sacred one lives inside of me. Listen to those words. Take it to your heart. The sacred one lives inside of me. Let it heal you today. I will never forget. I am sacred. I will never forget. I am sacred. I invite everybody to take these words to heart, to take our intention today. Let the sacred transform your life. Insist on it. It's your birthright. It's your inheritance. Thank you, Taylor, for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Georgie. I've really enjoyed this. It's been a beautiful time that we've shared, created, and I'm really grateful to have you on.
And pictures are on my website. My website's georgieholbrook.com. And you can see before and after pictures on my website also to encourage yourself that nothing's impossible.
Exactly. Thank you again, Georgie. Really, really appreciate you coming on.
Blessings to you and all that you do and all the lives that you touch.